everybody to my TED Talk, and I'm covering the topic, are lockdowns effective? So first of all, I'd like to start my TED Talk with just celebrating our 1 year and some change anniversary of our 2-week quarantine. I remember the exact day, like it was March 19th, I believe, on that Friday, when everybody's like, oh, we don't have school for about 2 weeks. And it was pretty naive of us to think back then that we're only going out for 2 weeks. But yeah, so all seriousness, I think this pandemic has definitely helped us develop, and has taught us a lot of things such as time management, how to stay connected despite not having human interactions, staying active, keeping up with our mental health, stuff like that. Unfortunately, for many people like myself, this pandemic has hurt us in unimaginable ways, such as like losing loved ones, new obstacles, facing financial struggles and stuff like that. And so I'm standing here telling you, like, did we really do the right thing when it happened? So let's get straight to it. So first, I have this like makeshift spectrum of like how a couple countries tackled the pandemic. So I'm gonna start with the middle, which is like, I chose Sweden because they had like a survival of the fittest, where they only locked down everybody above the age of 55, and then everybody else was a free for all. Then we have New Zealand on one end, who entered into complete isolation, locked down airports, everything. They only had themselves within the country. And then I have US on the other side. I'm staying pretty politically neutral because I don't know much about US politics. So I just put the US here because they're a little bit more hesitant entering into the lockdown. But later on in the talk, I'll talk to you like how they compensated. So first, New Zealand. So New Zealand entered into like extreme isolation. Most a part of the other Oceanic countries as well. They cut out like all airports, imports from other countries, all that stuff, and relied on their only economy. At first, when people heard them doing this like isolation tactic, they're like, oh, the economy's still not going to be able to like survive. And so it did take a really big hit at the beginning, but they kept the damage at a minimum, and they kept their cases and deaths really low. As you can see here, New Zealand's right here. You can barely see the amount of deaths that they have compared to the other countries, right? And so when they actually recently just had their first COVID-free concert. Again, they're still locked down compared to the other countries, but they're starting to return back to that old normal that we used to see pre-COVID. And so the next country I'm going to talk to you about is the US. Oh, okay, here we go. So I'm talking to you the other extreme, the US. And as you can see, there's a bunch of hot zones, like high COVID activity states, and this is all of the US. And so the US was originally hesitant going into lockdown because since it's a big capitalist country, they were hesitant because they were worried about how the economy would survive afterwards. And so a lot of people didn't enforce the lockdown, and there was a lot of things that they didn't put a lot of restrictions on. And so it did hit the economy really hard for the US, and like their plan of like staying a little bit more open and stuff like that compared to other countries on what they're doing at a similar time was an interesting approach. But now they implemented the stimulus checks and stuff like that, and the stimulus project to give back to people that couldn't work or were unemployed during this time. And so they were late to react at the beginning, but now they're compensating with investing a lot of money into vaccines and like getting ahead of that curve and getting this herd immunity that everybody is talking about. So next country I would like to talk about is, this is a picture of Charles Darwin. And the reason why I put this guy up here is because he's the founder of the theory of evolution, and the guy and like survival of the fittest. And so what Sweden did is like their approach was survival of the fittest, basically. That's what from the articles that I've heard. And so they tackled it by isolating people that are over the age of 55, saying, oh, you need to stay at home, this virus is deadly to your health and stuff like that. And they let everybody else work perfectly fine, and whoever gets it, they get sick, they try to develop the antibodies and move on with their life. And so a lot of people thought this was ethically wrong at the beginning, because they're like, most countries were entering full lockdowns, and they're like, oh, we're just lockdowning just the people that are highly susceptible to it. And so they stayed open by keeping like many essential services open. They had certain times that elderly could go shopping to like the grocery market or going to the doctors, stuff like that. and it's surprisingly that was pretty efficient compared to other countries, is because they kept the cases down and they didn't put imports or exports out, stuff like that. And so now they're investing into a lot of money into the vaccines, similar to the US, and they're getting ahead of that curve, and they already have that herd immunity from before, of that survival of the fittest idea. And so now they're achieving it even faster. And so now we run into my problem. This guy. This is Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. Honestly, he's a cool guy. I rock with him and stuff like that. The main problem is this guy right here. Hold on. Him, Doug Ford. He's the Premier of Ontario. And so this is why I wanted to cover my TED Talk about, is like, are they effective? Because Toronto, I don't know if you guys have been keeping it up, Toronto has never, or like the whole of Canada has never exited a lockdown phase compared to other countries. And so now I'm like, oh dang, I'm going back to Canada for the summer and stuff like that. I want to see my family, and there's a bunch of restrictions and protocols that I need to follow, similar to Simeon, that we have to do to get into the country. And so I'm like wondering, is COVID really that bad in Canada if the US is already starting to open up? And so if lockdowns were so effective, why are we still in lockdown in Canada for however long? And so the problem is, hold on, I need my numbers. So in Canada, recently there's been a spike daily of 3,424 cases. In Ontario, not Canada, in Ontario. So we compare that to a state that has similar population, fortunately that happens to be North Carolina, and they have about 1,600 cases per day. And like, we're saying like, how is one country having double the amount of cases if they're in the complete isolation lockdown protocol? And we're wondering, and that made me question the effectiveness of the lockdown. And so now, are they really effective? So this is a graph recently, so you can see this is the graph of UK deaths, because this is the best graph I could find. And so the blue line is the number of average deaths per year that usually happen throughout the course of the year. The red line is the number of deaths that happened in the year 2020. And this is the peak of the COVID, right? A really big jump of deaths. But if we compare the graph to like, to non-COVID death related. So it's still a pretty big jump in that COVID peak area. And the reason is because when COVID hit, a lot of countries shifted their attention from long-term care like people to like just strictly COVID focus. And that left a lot of like elderly people and people that are like needed help to like unfortunately pass away or die of like not getting the attention care, as well as cancer patients and other big diseases like that have lost a lot of attention, and they unfortunately passed away due to their like due to their like lack of care. And so now so I'm showing you these numbers, and it's like all these countries have entered into some form of lockdown. So why were some more effective than others? And so now I was wondering if like these lockdowns were the true approach, because we saw Sweden, who had a somewhat pseudo lockdown that worked, and then we had the U.S. who didn't really want to go into lockdown. They were locked out in certain phases, but now they're ahead of the curve on like a lot of countries. And so lockdowns are effective in the short term. Yes, it buys scientists and like medicine people time to develop vaccines and to contain the virus. But long term, it is not quite as helpful, because first, the problem is herd immunity when we're in lockdown. If we're completely isolating ourselves from the virus, we don't develop like the antibodies to get it. Yes, it was a deadly virus to like some, but the more like the younger people, such as the people that were like allowed to work in like Sweden and stuff like that, got it, developed antibodies, stuff like that. The other approach is the vaccine approach of getting antibodies. So unfortunately for the US, we're striving to get around 70 to 75% of people vaccinated. The problem is with that is like, there's people that don't want to get vaccinated. There's people that are afraid of the vaccine. There's people that are allergic to the vaccine. And like, that causes a big problem whether or not we can achieve this herd immunity that we're aiming for. And so now, also with lockdowns, it has a big economic hit. As I talked before, the stimulus program for both Canada and the US that put in other countries such as the UK, stuff like that, as well as the big mental health hit for it. So next. All right, so the mental health portion of the lockdown. So unfortunately, during the lockdown, we saw an increase of suicides and increases of divorce rates. It's because people are more they're at home. They couldn't do this normal stuff that they've been doing. It's like with marriage couples, they see each other more and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I guess some people don't like seeing each other as much as others. The lockdown also had a shock of increasing of unhealthy eating. So if we really think about it, there's a lot of fast food restaurants, and we order a lot of fast food. And like, even if you're at home, like for example, say you, like typically the stereotype of whenever someone gets out of a breakup, they eat unhealthy, like say the ice cream or whatever. That's more like stereotypical for the girl. I'm just saying that's just an example, right? But that produces that unhealthy eating habit, and it's not good for each other. Also the lack of human interaction with humans, that like we're like social butterflies and stuff like that, some more than others, and we lack that interaction, and so that really takes a toll to our mental health. What else? Next, the economic hit. So the economy really hit really big, like really bad at first, and so that's why we have to implement the stimulus checks. And so with the stimulus checks, it helped the unemployment to get like paid and to cover fees and stuff like that. The problem with that was like 70% of American citizens live paycheck to paycheck, and the amount of money that the government was giving wasn't enough to keep up with their like daily needs and stuff like that. And so now with these that caused local businesses dying and bigger businesses winning, such as like Amazon online shopping, Walmart. Shockingly, cannabis also had a record-breaking of $14.5 billion made in the year of 2020, and solely in the U.S. And so now, that question, it proposes the question: will we ever recover? And so, there we are. Okay, so will we ever recover? So most of the world is talking about this new herd immunity. Can we achieve herd immunity for us to be able to travel, to develop antibodies, stuff like that? The problem is, as I said before, many people don't want to get it, scared of it. They may be allergic to it. The world also is, since it's such a new and fluid situation, we have little research, and we don't know the repercussions of such like lockdowns, vaccines, stuff like that. And so, is COVID going to develop as the new flu shot? Is it going to be like a yearly thing as we renew the new flu shot, or if not, we don't know just yet. And so, this also poses the question: are masks the new normal? Are we just going to be like socially distanced, always wearing masks all the time for however long? We don't know, because of it being so fluid. And so, in my conclusion, I wish I could have a conclusion about whether or not if they're effective or not, but it's again too soon, too hard, and it's too hard to tell whether or not we handled this situation appropriately, because we've seen the 4 different countries they took on this pandemic completely different than one another. And so lockdowns were effective at the beginning, of flattening the curve, containing the virus, buying time. But in the long term, we're seeing numbers that like just don't make sense. As Canada having double the amount of cases compared to the U.S. And again, we don't know the side effects and the long-term costs of like whether if our economy if our economy will recover, and all we can do is just hope to do our best. And that's all I have.